I'll never forget the night it happened. The red and blue lights from my cruiser flickered across the empty highway, bouncing off the glass of an all-night gas station in the middle of nowhere. I was just finishing a late patrol in Clayton County, Georgia, the kind of shift that usually meant noise complaints, maybe a DUI, nothing more. But that night, I pulled in for a coffee I didn't really need, and that's when I saw her. An old woman bundled in a faded sweater, sitting alone on the cold bench outside the station. Her thin hands trembled as she tried to zip her coat. A single grocery bag sat at her feet, stuffed with what looked like a change of clothes and a worn-out Bible. I slowed my stride, my heart catching in my throat. Because I knew that face. Even after 15 years, I knew. "Grandma," I whispered. She looked up startled. Her pale blue eyes widened, wet with confusion. And then recognition. "Ellie," her voice cracked, carrying both disbelief and relief. I froze, my badge heavy on my chest, my holstered gun at my hip, the whole weight of the uniform suddenly meaningless compared to the sight in front of me. It was my grandmother, Ruth Whitaker, 88 years old, the woman who once raised me on sweet tea. And hymns, the woman who stood between me and my father's rage more times than I could count. And she was sitting abandoned at a gas station at 2 a.m. I knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in mine. "Grandma, what are you doing here? Who brought you?" Her lips quivered. "They did. Your mom and dad. They said they'd be right back. But it's been hours." She glanced toward the road as if still hoping their headlights might return. "I don't think they're coming." For a moment, the hum of the soda machine inside and the faint buzz of a neon beer sign were the only sounds. My throat burned. 15 years ago, my father, David Whitaker, had kicked me out of the house. He called me useless, told me I was nothing but trouble. I was 18 with a duffel bag and no plan forced to survive on my own. Now, on a routine patrol, I had stumbled onto the cruelest proof that nothing had changed. If anything, he'd only grown colder, cruel enough to leave his own mother to fend for herself at a gas station like unwanted baggage. I sat beside her on that cold bench. The air smelled of gasoline and fried chicken from the deli counter inside. A truck rumbled past on the highway, indifferent. My radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice, but I didn't answer. "Grandma, you're safe now," I told her firmly. "You're coming with me." Her chin trembled. "But your father..." "My father made his choice a long time ago." My words came sharper than I intended. "And tonight, I'm making mine." I led her to the cruiser, buckled her in like she was the most important passenger I'd ever carry. Driving away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching her frail frame under the harsh glow of the dome light. My mind raced anger, sorrow, but also a cold, steady resolve. This wasn't just about neglect. This was abandonment, elder abuse, and I was a cop. I knew what the law said, and more importantly, I knew what justice demanded. 15 years since my father threw me out like garbage. Now, he had thrown away the woman who once held our family together. And I had just found her. That night, as I parked in front of my small brick house on Oak Street in Jonesboro, I knew my life had changed. My father thought he could cut ties with me and bury his cruelty in silence. But by leaving Grandma at that gas station, he had dug his own grave. I carried her inside, fixed her a blanket on the couch, and brewed tea the way she used to for me. She smiled weakly, whispering, "You always were stronger than he said." I pressed my hand over hers. "Rest, Grandma. Tomorrow we start something he'll never see coming." Because revenge wasn't always about fists or bullets. Sometimes it was about exposing a man's sins in broad daylight and taking away the only thing he ever truly valued: his house, his pride, his name. And this time, I wasn't an 18-year-old girl begging for shelter. I was Officer Eleanor Whitaker, badge number 4127, sworn to protect and serve. And my first duty was to the woman who once protected me. By sunrise, the house on Oak Street smelled like coffee and oatmeal. I tucked a quilt around Grandma Ruth and set her glasses on the end table the same way she used to set mine when I fell asleep on her couch as a kid. The night had emptied me out like the highway itself had run straight through my chest. I called into dispatch, told them I was off for family reasons, then muted the radio and let the kitchen stay quiet. Ellie Grandma's voice drifted from the living room. Is it really morning? It is, I said, walking in with a mug I knew she'd pretend was too sweet and then drink anyway. You're safe. You're home. She patted my hand, small and bird-like. I knew you'd come by one day. I just didn't expect the gas station. That sentence lodged under my ribs. I kept my face steady, but inside something old and raw uncurled 15 years of it. I was 18 when my father, David Whitaker, told me to get out. The date sits in my head like a tack. May 28, 2010. High school graduation was 3 days away at Jonesboro High, my red gown still pinned on the back of my bedroom door. Dad had just finished dinner in that clipped way of his meatloaf jarred gravy. The TV turned to the weather, though no one listened. He wiped his mouth, looked at me, and said, You're not moving in with some police crowd. You'll start at the shop on Monday and stop this nonsense. By the shop, he meant Whitaker Heating and Air, a garage on Terra Boulevard where he spent his days under trucks and his evenings under beer. He liked things he could tighten with a wrench. Daughters didn't fall in that category. My mother, Linda, sat ramrod straight at the table, eyes fixed on her plate. She taught Sunday school at Maple Street Baptist, made casseroles for funerals, and never once crossed Dad out loud. Crossing him was my job. I've already paid my deposit, I said. The GPSTC, the Academy in Forsyth, accepted me for the fall. This isn't a whim. He laughed, a hard, hollow bark that made the salt shaker jump. A cop. You'll quit the first time someone yells. You're not built for it. I looked at my hands. They trembled, but not with fear. With anger. Someone in this house yells every night, I said softly. It happened fast after that. Chairs scraped. My brother Caleb stood up like he might say something, then sat back down. He was 20, worked evenings at the shop, and knew how to survive. Dad pointed down the hall. Pack a bag. You want to play soldier? Go play. You don't eat my food and defy me. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. She wiped the table in small, frantic circles, polishing invisible crumbs. Grandma Ruth stood in the doorway with her cardigan half-buttoned the way she did when sleep and worry met halfway. David, she said, voice steady, that girl is the only one in this house with a spine tender enough to feel right and wrong. She's the only one too stubborn to listen, he snapped. I packed. Jeans, 2 t-shirts, the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Grandma gave me with my name written inside the cover in her careful cursive. The red graduation gown, because I didn't want to give him the pleasure of seeing it hang there after I was gone. Grandma followed me into my room and helped fold what little I owned. She tucked a $20 bill into my pocket like it could shield me from everything. At the door, Dad held out his palm for my car keys. House rules. You don't get the Taurus. David, Grandma said sharp now she needs that car. He stared her down. My house. My name on the title. I dropped the keys into his hand. They clinked against his wedding ring. I walked down Willow Bend Drive carrying a duffel bag and the kind of shame that feels heavier than metal. Grandma walked with me for a block, small steps. At the corner, she hugged me, bones and lavender lotion. When you think you can't keep walking, she whispered, remember? You come from women who did. I slept on couches that summer. Sometimes I slept in my friend Tessa's dented Pontiac Sunfire behind Dairy Queen on North Avenue because her mom's boyfriend drank, and I didn't want to hear him apologizing to the walls. I worked the counter at the Waffle House on Tara, learned how to smile when a trucker called me sweetheart, and how to carry 3 plates without dropping hash browns. I learned the kind of math that doesn't get you into college but gets you through the month. Grandma called me from her landline in the afternoons when Dad was at the shop and Mom was at church. I made cornbread today, she'd say like a code. And I put some aside. I'd meet her in the parking lot at Piggly Wiggly, and she'd hand me a Tupperware from the trunk as if we were in a spy movie. We were spies in our own family. We learned to speak in the negative space between what we could say. The fall I left for Forsyth, I took a Greyhound with a suitcase and $70. The Academy didn't soften me. It sanded me down to what I actually was. I found that I liked rules when they weren't a man's rage dressed up as authority. I liked the weight of a duty belt when it meant I could keep someone else's kid from getting hurt. I learned to shoot, to drive, to listen with my eyes. The first day, I huffed through the mile-and-a-half run. The instructor barked, "Whitaker, you dying," I said. "Not today, sir," and meant it. I graduated, came back to Clayton County, and wore a uniform that fit better than any dress ever had. I rented the little brick house on Oak Street with money the Waffle House tips had started and the police paycheck finished. I kept the couch clear, like maybe one day someone would need a place to land. For a while, I told myself Dad would soften when he saw me in blue. He didn't. At Thanksgiving 2017, I brought a pecan pie to the old ranch house on Willow Bend. He opened the door, looked at the badge, and said, "We don't need any trouble here." Mom reached for the pie, then let her hands fall to her sides. Grandma hugged me in the yard with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm proud, Elle." Dad stood on the porch and called out dinners for family as if that settled anything. It settled something for me. When I saw Grandma at that gas station last night, the Speedy Mart off I-75, the one with flickering lights and an ice freezer that never closes, I recognized the way she held herself small, like she'd finally learned there is no safe size to take up in a room with a man like my father. I recognized the sweater, too. I'd bought it at Goodwill on Battle Creek Road 5 winters back when her hands got cold. As I cleaned up the breakfast dishes, I saw her pill organizer peeking from the grocery bag she'd clutched all night. 2 morning slots were empty. The evening ones for the last 2 days were full. My throat tightened. If Dad and Mom had been caring for her, they'd been careless at best. At worst, they'd been cruel. Ellie, Grandma said suddenly, "I think your father threw out my address book. I couldn't find it last week. Maybe I just misplaced it." "Maybe," I said, because I didn't want to say out loud what I thought that the address book with my number in it was exactly the thing he didn't want her to have. I sat beside her on the couch and opened a small spiral notebook I keep for statements. Not official, yet just the habit of a cop who knows memory gets slippery when you need it most. "Grandma, do you remember what time they dropped you off? What they said?" She frowned, concentrating. "We stopped for gas around 8. Your mother went inside for a drink. Your father said he had to check something in the trunk. He told me to sit and wait a minute. Then the car pulled away. I thought they were circling back. I waited. Ellie. I waited until the man behind the counter turned off the lottery sign. I wrote it down. 8 p.m., waited until closing. I asked if she was cold. She shook her head, brave out of habit. I draped another blanket over her anyway. 15 years since I walked down Willow Bend with a duffel bag. 15 hours since I found the only person who ever stood up for me, sitting on a metal bench under a buzzing light. People like my father count on darkness to hide what they do. People like me keep flashlights in the cruiser. I put the notebook away and pulled my phone. I called Tessa Now, a nurse at Southern Regional, and asked if she knew a good elder law attorney who'd talk to us fast. I called Marcos Alvarez, a detective at the department who's seen enough to know where the bones get buried in family stories. Then I set my phone face down and took Grandma's hand again. "You did nothing wrong," I told her, like I was telling 18-year-old me. "We're going to fix this. We're going to do it the right way." Outside, a garbage truck clanged down Oak Street like a band warming up. Morning light spilled across the rug Grandma's sister had woven in Griffin, back when her hands were steady. I watched the light move and thought about names on deeds and names on mailboxes and how a man can own a house with his signature but still forfeit it with his choices. Ellie, Grandma whispered, half asleep now. "Do you remember the summer you learned to ride a bike on Willow Bend and your father said you'd never get it? You fell twice and got up 3 times. I smiled. "I remember." "Then get up again." I squeezed her hand. "Yes, ma'am." I went to the kitchen, poured the coffee I didn't need, and opened my laptop. The gas station would have cameras. Cameras don't lie about cars leaving without passengers. Somewhere between 8:00 p.m. and 2:00 a.m., my parents had chosen who they were in pixels and timestamps. I intended to let those pixels speak in a place where men like my father can't shout them down. It's strange, the arithmetic of a life 15 years out, one night back in, and the sum is suddenly simple. He cut me loose at 18 to keep his house quiet. I'd keep it quiet too by emptying it. The next day, I drove Grandma Ruth to a doctor's appointment at Southern Regional Medical Center in Riverdale. I'd called ahead, explained the situation in the clipped language of a police report. Elderly female 88 abandoned at a gas station. Possible neglect history of missed medication. But when the nurse led us into the exam room and laid a gentle hand on Grandma's arm, the whole story spilled out in colors more vivid than ink could catch. "Your blood pressure's high," the nurse said. "When was your last full meal?" Grandma hesitated. "Maybe Monday." It was Thursday. I clenched my jaw. I'd seen teenagers in holding cells with better nourishment. The doctor confirmed what I already suspected: dehydration, mild malnutrition, blood sugar out of balance. Nothing that couldn't be corrected with proper care. But it wasn't the medical facts that turned my stomach. It was the timeline. My parents hadn't just made a cruel choice at a gas station. They'd been neglecting her for months. After the exam, Grandma squeezed my hand. "Don't make too much of it, Ellie. I don't want trouble." "Trouble already happened," I said quietly. "Now we're just calling it by its name." I dropped her back at my house, then drove to the Speedy Mart off I-75, where I'd first seen her. The clerk, a lanky man in his 20s named Darnell, looked up from stocking chips. "Back again, officer." I showed my badge. "I need the camera footage from Tuesday night, 8 to midnight. He scratched his head. "We keep it on a drive in the office. You gonna need a warrant." "Not if you let me view it voluntarily." He shrugged. "My boss hates paperwork more than I do. Come on." In the cramped office, the footage rolled grainy across a battered monitor. At 7:58 p.m., Dad's white Ford Crown Victoria pulled up. I recognized the dent in the rear bumper from when Caleb backed it into a mailbox in 2005. The tape showed Mom walking inside Dad, opening the trunk. Grandma stepped out slowly, clutching her grocery bag. Dad pointed toward the bench. She sat. He shut the trunk. A minute later, the Crown Vic pulled away. No return. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just abandonment, it was premeditated. He'd even opened the trunk as if to mask his real intent. "Can I get a copy?" I asked. Darnell slid a thumb drive from a drawer. "For you?" "Sure. Just don't drag me into court." "You're not the one who should worry about court," I said. That night, sitting with Grandma in the living room, I showed her the still image of Dad's car driving off without her. Her lips tightened. He didn't even look back. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And he won't look forward either once we're through." I thought about the old house on Willow Bend Drive. I could still see its peeling shutters, the cracked driveway, where I once chalked hopscotch squares. It wasn't just wood and brick, it was Dad's monument to control. He believed a man's worth was measured in what he owned. He owned the shop, the car, the house. He thought he owned us too. But ownership has a way of slipping through greedy hands. Grandma must have read the storm in my face. "Ellie," she whispered, "don't lose yourself to anger." "I'm not," I said. "I'm finding myself in justice." I called Marcos Alvarez, the detective I trusted most. He picked up on the second ring. "Whitaker, what's going on?" "I've got evidence of elder abandonment. Victim's my grandmother. Suspects are my parents." There was a pause. "That's heavy." "I don't care about heavy. I care about the law." He exhaled. "Bring me the footage. We'll open a case file. But you know this isn't just police work. This is family court too. Power of attorney guardianship." I know I cut in. And that's where we'll hit them where it hurts. The following Sunday, I drove Grandma past Willow Bend. She looked out the window silent until we slowed by the house. Mom was on the porch watering geraniums. Dad sat in a lawn chair, beer, sweating in his hand. They looked small, ordinary, almost harmless. Grandma's voice was barely audible. "That was my home longer than it's been his. I planted that oak tree when your mom was a baby." "Then it'll be yours again," I said. Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain but hopeful. "How?" "You'll see." That evening, I made a pot of stew and spread the paperwork on my kitchen table. Elder law pamphlets, property records, the thumb drive labeled Speedy Mart footage. Grandma sat across from me, spooning broth slowly. "Ellie," she said, "your father thinks he can decide who counts as family. He thought that when he pushed you out. He thought it when he left me. But he's wrong." I nodded. He's about to learn family isn't who you control, it's who you protect. And as I looked at her fragile hand steadying the spoon, I knew we were standing on the edge of something irreversible. The truth was out. My parents had abandoned the one person who gave me love when they gave me nothing. And now, armed with the law, the badge, and the blood in my veins, I was ready to strike back. Not in rage, but in justice. Not with fists, but with signatures. Not alone, but with Grandma at my side. Because if they thought leaving her at a gas station was the end of the story, they hadn't seen the next chapter. The Monday after I brought Grandma home, I walked into Clayton County Courthouse with my badge tucked under my blazer and a folder of evidence pressed tight against my ribs. The marble floors echoed under my boots, each step steadier than the last. I wasn't there on department business. I was there as Eleanor Whitaker, granddaughter of Ruth Whitaker, age 88, survivor of abandonment. Inside the folder was everything: the time-stamped footage from the Speedy Mart, the doctor's report about her malnutrition, even a statement I'd written in my neatest block letters, the way we're trained for incident reports. But this time, it wasn't some stranger's case. It was ours. Grandma waited outside in the lobby, sitting upright on a bench, her purse folded neatly in her lap. She insisted she wanted to be there, though she was nervous. I leaned down before walking into the clerk's office. "Grandma, you don't have to be scared. We're not begging for scraps here. We're claiming what's right." She patted my hand. "Ellie, you were always the stubborn one. Thank God for it." I smiled faintly and stepped inside. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses, looked up. "How can I help you, Officer Whitaker?" "I'm here to file for guardianship of Ruth Whitaker, and I'd like to enter evidence of abandonment and neglect by her current caregivers, David and Linda Whitaker." Her eyebrows rose. "Your parents?" "Yes, ma'am," I said without flinching. She didn't argue, just handed me a thick packet of forms. "Fill these out. Elder Law Court meets Fridays. If your evidence is as strong as you say, the judge will schedule an emergency hearing." That night, I spread the forms across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Grandma sat across from me, glasses perched low, sipping chamomile tea. "Are you sure you want this, Grandma? It won't be pretty." Her eyes, pale but steady, met mine. "Ellie, your father, already shamed this family when he left me on that bench. What you're doing isn't shame. It's dignity." I swallowed hard. "Then let's do it." Filling out those forms, I thought back to the girl I'd been at 18, clutching a duffel bag while Dad slammed the door. Back then, I had no power, no badge, no paycheck, no voice anyone listened to. But now, I was sworn to the law, and the law, when wielded right, was sharper than any weapon. Still, anger lurked under my skin. I wanted to storm down Willow Bend Drive, pound on the door, and drag them out by the collar. But justice isn't vengeance in a fit of rage. Justice is patience with teeth. On Wednesday, I called attorney Carol Jenkins, a woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. She'd built her practice in Jonesboro on elder rights cases. We sat in her office, surrounded by shelves of law books and framed degrees. "You've got abandonment. You've got neglect," she said after reviewing the file. "With that footage and her medical report, the judge will have no choice but to remove your parents as caregivers." "And the house?" I asked. She looked up over her glasses. "If Ruth assigns you power of attorney, you can move on property decisions. If she wants, she can sell the house and use the funds for her care." Grandma reached over her hand, trembling but resolute. "That house was mine long before David laid claim. If selling it gives me peace, then I'll sign whatever I need." Carol leaned back, nodding. "Then let's prepare. They won't see it coming." That evening, back at my place, Grandma sat with her Bible open, though her eyes weren't moving across the page. "Ellie," she said softly, "your mother was a kind girl once. She braided my hair before church when I lost my strength. I don't know how she let herself follow him so far into cruelty." I didn't answer right away. I'd wrestled with that myself. I finally said, "Silence can be as cruel as words, Grandma." She chose silence. Grandma sighed, closing the Bible, then let the truth speak louder. Thursday night, as I prepped for the hearing, dispatch called, a domestic disturbance on Tara Boulevard. For a second, I thought of ignoring it. Family first case? First. But the badge on my chest reminded me, justice doesn't punch a time clock. I took the call, resolved it, then came home after midnight. Grandma was asleep on the couch, her hand curled around a photograph. I leaned closer. It was of me at 6 years old, sitting on her lap with a popsicle, her smile wide and proud. The past wasn't just pain. It was proof that love had always been there, waiting to be defended. Friday morning, I buttoned my uniform shirt, the one with sharp creases I ironed myself. Not because the court required it, but because I wanted Dad to see me in it. I wanted him to see the woman he called useless now, walking into court armed with truth and law. Grandma took my arm as we stepped into the courtroom. The wood-paneled walls smelled of polish and history. The judge, Honorable Samuel Porter, a man with snowy hair and a reputation for stern fairness, presided. My parents sat across the aisle. Dad's jaw was set like stone. Mom avoided my eyes. The clerk called the case, Ruth Whitaker petition for guardianship. And I knew the decision I'd made to fight to act was about to rewrite everything they thought they owned. Because this wasn't just a family dispute, this was a reckoning. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. The house was dark. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome, and every sound outside, the hum of a distant train, the whistle of crickets, seemed louder than it should have been. I walked into the living room to check on Grandma. She was still awake, sitting in the recliner with a knitted blanket pulled up to her chin. The lamp beside her glowed soft and yellow, and the picture of Grandpa Henry in his army uniform rested on the side table. She looked up as if she'd been waiting for me. "You never did sleep easy, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. I smiled faintly, lowering myself onto the couch. "Guess I got it from you. I remember when I was little, you'd sit up with me all night during thunderstorms. You'd hum old hymns till I fell asleep." Her lips curved into the same warm smile I remembered from childhood. "I did. You shook like a leaf every time the thunder rolled, but you never cried. You just clenched your fists and waited it out." I let out a small laugh, though it sounded brittle. "Dad used to call that being stubborn." "And I called it strength," she said. "Don't you forget that." Her words pulled me back through time, back to that house on Willow Bend Drive. I could see myself at 10 years old, riding a rusty pink bicycle she found at a yard sale. Dad said it was a piece of junk not worth fixing, but Grandma wheeled it out anyway, tightening the loose chain with her own wrinkled fingers, dirt smudging her palms. Now, she told me, steadying the handlebars, "You keep your eyes forward. Don't look at your feet. Don't look at me. Look where you're going." I remember the wobble, the crash into the mailbox, the sting of gravel in my knees. I wanted to quit right then, but she lifted me up, brushed off the grit, and whispered, "One more try, honey. You're stronger than you think." By the third attempt, I was flying down the street, her voice cheering after me. And when I finally circled back, she was clapping with her whole body like I'd just won a medal. Dad came out of the garage, saw me riding, and shook his head. "Doesn't change anything," he muttered before turning away. It stung then. But sitting with Grandma now, I realized whose voice I had carried all these years, and whose I had learned to ignore. "Do you ever think about going back?" Grandma asked suddenly. "To the shop? To your father?" I stared at her, stunned. "Why would I?" He made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. She looked down at her hands. "He was always proud, you know. Too proud to admit when he was wrong. Too proud to say he needed anyone. I think that pride has eaten him alive." "Pride doesn't excuse cruelty," I said. "Leaving you at that gas station? That wasn't pride. That was pure selfishness." Her eyes glistened. "I don't want you to carry hate in your heart, Ellie." "I'm not carrying hate," I said softly. "I'm carrying you. That's enough." I made her a cup of cocoa before bed. As I stirred the milk and watched the steam rise, I thought about all the nights she'd done the same for me. When Mom wouldn't come into my room after a nightmare, Grandma always would. She'd hum the same hymn she used at the gas station when I found her blessed assurance. The sound of her voice was what pulled me out of the dark. And now, 15 years later, maybe I was meant to be the one pulling her out of it. The next day, while Grandma rested, I drove out to the county records office. The building smelled like dust and toner. A clerk named Mr. Dalton, with half-moon glasses and a Georgia Bulldog's tie, pulled out a manila folder with the property deed for the Whitaker house. "Name on the deed's David Whitaker," he said, tapping the page. "But look here. Ruth Whitaker co-signed back in 1972, when she and her late husband paid off the original mortgage." I leaned closer, my pulse quickening. Her name was still there, printed neatly in faded typewriter ink, Ruth Eleanor James Whitaker. "So legally," I said, "she still holds ownership." Dalton nodded. "Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Since Henry passed, that house is hers. Sole owner, unless she signed it over." "Did she?" I slid the copy of the Speedy Mart footage across the desk, not willingly. He winced. "Well, that changes things. If she never consented to relinquish her rights, and you've got evidence she's been mistreated, you've got a strong case." I walked out gripping the folder like it was a weapon. Because it was. That evening, I sat at the table again with Grandma. "You still have the right to that house," I told her. "Dad never filed the proper paperwork after Grandpa passed. Legally, you're the owner." Her eyes widened, then softened, with something between relief and sorrow. "So all this time, I could have gone home." I shook my head. "Not with him there. He never would have let you through the door. But now you can decide what happens." She placed her hand on mine, her skin paper-thin veins like blue rivers. "What do you think I should do?" I met her eyes. "You know what I think." She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached for the pen I'd set on the table. Her hand shook, but the line of her signature was steady enough to cut. She slid the paper back to me with a small, almost mischievous smile. "For once, let me be the one to stand up for you too." I felt something in my chest shift like a lock turning. For 15 years, I had carried the weight of his words that I was useless, unwanted, a mistake. But here she was, at 88 years old, telling me that wasn't true. She was handing me not just a house, but a chance to show the world and him that silence doesn't last forever. That night after she went to bed, I sat on the porch with my service pistol locked away and my hands wrapped around a cooling mug. The cicadas screamed in the dark and I let the sound wash over me. I thought about the judge's face tomorrow, about Dad's eyes when the papers hit the table, about the neighbors whispering when they realized the house on Willow Bend wasn't his anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the morning. I was waiting for it. Justice doesn't shout, it waits. And then it strikes. The courthouse smelled like lemon polish and paper. I walked Grandma Ruth up the stone steps, her arm looped through mine, her steps steady despite the weight of what we carried. A few neighbors had gathered outside curiosity, buzzing through their whispers. Word gets around in Clayton County. Folks knew my father, David Whitaker, as the man who ran Whitaker Heating and Air and never missed a Sunday service. They didn't know the man who left his 88-year-old mother on a metal bench at a gas station. Inside the courtroom felt colder than the September morning air. Rows of wooden benches creaked as people sat. Dad and Mom were already there, dressed too neatly, their lawyer whispering to them. Dad's jaw clenched, his shoulders squared, like he was daring anyone to call him wrong. Mom kept her eyes on her lap, twisting her wedding ring. I guided Grandma to our table. She smoothed her skirt, lifted her chin, and whispered, "Don't let them rattle you, Ellie." "I won't," I whispered back. The bailiff called the case in re Ruth Whitaker, petition for guardianship and property rights. Judge Samuel Porter, a stern man with white hair and wire rim glasses, glanced over the room. "Proceed." Our attorney, Carol Jenkins, stood. "Your Honor, we represent Ruth Whitaker. We have evidence of abandonment and neglect by her son and daughter-in-law David and Linda Whitaker. We petition for immediate transfer of guardianship to Ruth's granddaughter, Officer Eleanor Whitaker, and for recognition of Ruth's sole ownership of her residence on Willow Bend Drive." Dad shot me a look like a knife across the aisle. I met it head on. Carol presented the Speedy Mart footage first. The screen flickered with grainy video, Dad's Crown Vic pulling up, Mom walking inside, Dad opening the trunk, Grandma stepping out, then sitting quietly on the bench. A minute later, the car pulled away, taillights shrinking into the dark. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. A man muttered, "Good Lord." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Whitaker, is that your vehicle?" Dad's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this video is taken out of context. Mr. Whitaker." "Answer the question," the judge interrupted. Dad's jaw ticked. "Yes, that's my car." "And is that your mother?" "Yes." "And you left her at that gas station?" Dad's lips pressed tight. We were coming back." Judge Porter's gavel cracked. Hours later, in the middle of the night, with an elderly woman alone. The silence in the room was heavy, like the air before a storm. Next came the doctor's report: malnutrition, dehydration, missed medication. Carol read the details aloud, each line, another nail hammered into the coffin of their defense. Finally, Carol turned to me. "Officer Whitaker, would you describe the circumstances under which you found your grandmother?" I rose, my uniform crisp badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. My voice didn't shake. "On patrol, I pulled into Speedy Mart around 2 a.m. I saw my grandmother, Ruth Whitaker, sitting alone outside. She had one bag with her. She said my parents had left her there hours earlier. She was cold, disoriented, and had not eaten. I transported her to my residence and ensured she received medical attention. I then obtained this footage, confirming her account." Carol nodded. "Why are you petitioning for guardianship?" "Because she deserves safety and dignity," I said, "and because the people who should have given her both chose to abandon her instead." I sat. Grandma reached over her frail fingers, wrapping mine. "Proud of you," she whispered. When it was Dad's turn, he stood, puffed up, his voice loud enough to rattle the rafters. "My daughter's got a chip on her shoulder," he barked. "She's been against me since she was 18. She's making a circus of this. We never abandoned Mama. We were taking a break. Things got heated at home." Laughter broke out from the back row, bitter and sharp. The judge slammed his gavel again. "This is not a joke, Mr. Whitaker. Elder abandonment is a serious matter." Dad's face reddened, but he pressed on. "She wants revenge. That's all this is." Carol rose. "Your Honor, the only revenge in this room is justice. Justice for a woman who gave her life to raising her family only to be discarded like trash." The judge turned to Mom. "Mrs. Whitaker, do you have anything to add?" Her lips trembled. She glanced at Dad, then at me, then down at her hands. I don't." The judge's voice cut like steel. "Silence speaks volumes, ma'am." When the arguments closed, the judge leaned back, tapping his gavel softly against the bench. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. "I've heard enough," Judge Porter said. "This court finds that David and Linda Whitaker failed in their duty of care to Ruth Whitaker. Guardianship is hereby granted to Eleanor Whitaker. Furthermore, based on the property records presented, this court recognizes Ruth Whitaker as the sole legal owner of the residence on Willow Bend Drive." Gasps again. Dad shot to his feet. "You can't do this? That's my house." "It was never your house," the judge cut in sharply. "It belongs to your mother, and she is free to do with it as she chooses." The gavel came down with finality. Case closed. Grandma clutched my hand so tightly I thought her fingers might break. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't of fear this time. They were relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters and neighbors crowded the steps. Microphones shoved forward, cameras flashed. "Officer Whitaker, how does it feel to win?" one shouted. I looked at Grandma, her small frame steady beside me, her eyes lifted toward the sky. Then I faced the cameras. "It's not about winning," I said firmly. "It's about dignity. My grandmother gave everything to this family. Today, the law gave something back." That night back at Oak Street, we sat together on the porch. Fireflies blinked over the grass. Grandma leaned her head on my shoulder. "Ellie," she murmured, "your father lost today. But you gained something far better." "What's that?" I asked. Her lips curved into a tired but peaceful smile. The truth finally spoken out loud. And I realized she was right. For 15 years, silence had been the weapon used against both of us. Today, we broke it. The following week, I drove Grandma down Terra Boulevard in my cruiser. We weren't on duty. I'd gotten permission to use the car because it was safer for her to ride in. Her hands folded in her lap purse tucked beside her. She looked small but steady. We turned onto Willow Bend Drive. For the first time in my life, I didn't slow down from shame or dread. This time, I slowed because the house at the end of the block, our house, wasn't theirs anymore. It was hers. Grandma's name was on the deed, and the judge's gavel had made it official. What happened next was up to her. She looked out the window, eyes clouding with memory. I planted that oak tree when your mother was just a toddler. I painted that porch 3 times, Henry, twice, me once. She shook her head. Feels strange to look at it like it belongs to me again? I pulled over across the street. It does. Legally, it always did. He just fooled you into believing otherwise. Later that afternoon, we sat in Attorney Carol Jenkins's office. The papers were ready. Ruth Carroll said, laying out the documents, as sole owner, you can sell the property outright. You'll need to sign here, here, and here. Eleanor, as power of attorney, you'll co-sign on her behalf to expedite the process. Grandma took the pen, her hand trembling but determined. She looked at me. Are you sure this is right, Ellie? It feels drastic. I met her eyes. Grandma, they abandoned you. They left you to sit on a bench outside a gas station. If they can cast you aside that easily, why should they keep the roof you built with your own hands? Her lips tightened. You're right. She pressed the pen to paper. With each stroke, the house on Willow Bend slipped further from my father's grasp. The closing happened fast, almost too fast for Dad to catch wind. By Friday, the house was sold to a couple from Macon who planned to renovate it. The funds went straight into an account under Grandma's name, secured for her care and needs. When the paperwork was finalized, I sat back in Carol's office, the weight of years falling from my shoulders. Carol smiled. Well, Officer Whitaker, that's that. They can scream all they want. The law is the law. Of course Dad did scream. He showed up on my porch that night, his face red, his fist pounding the screen door. You think you can take what's mine? He bellowed. I stepped outside, uniform on sidearm at my hip. It was never yours. You left her at that station, Dad. You made your choice. His eyes narrowed. You've always hated me, always looked for a way to tear me down. I shook my head slowly. I didn't have to look. You dug your own hole. He leaned in close, his breath heavy with beer. You'll regret this. I met his glare without flinching. No, you will. Behind me, the porch light cast us both in stark relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the child on the receiving end of his rage. I was the one holding the law behind me like an iron shield. The news spread quickly. Neighbors on Willow Bend whispered. Congregants at Maple Street Baptist shook their heads. Everyone knew now the Whitaker name no longer meant respect. It meant scandal. One evening, I stopped at Kroger to grab milk. A woman I barely knew from high school stopped me in the aisle. Ellie, I heard what you did for your grandma. That was brave. She's lucky to have you. I swallowed hard, nodding. No, ma'am. I'm lucky to have her. Grandma thrived in my home. She gained weight, her color improved, and she laughed more often, soft, sweet chuckles that warmed the whole room. She'd sit on the porch swing with her tea and watch kids ride bikes down Oak Street just like I once did. Sometimes she'd glance at me and say, "You finally came home." And I'd answer, "So did you." Still, the bitterness lingered. Dad hadn't just lost a house. He'd lost control. That was his real God, and I had shattered it. I knew he'd stew, maybe lash out. But he couldn't touch me now. The law was on my side, and the truth was too plain for anyone to ignore. The final twist came in the mail 2 weeks later, a notice from the county tax office addressed to Ruth Whitaker. Property sold, funds transferred, case closed. I held the envelope out to Grandma. She opened it with careful fingers, read it, and let out a long breath. Well, she said, I guess that's the end of Willow Bend. I shook my head. No, Grandma. That's the beginning of something else. The beginning of peace. She smiled, her eyes wet but bright. Then let's have it. That night, I sat by the window listening to the crickets sing. The house on Willow Bend no longer haunted me. It wasn't a place of exile anymore. It was just an address that no longer belonged to him. And in its place, we had something stronger: justice, written in ink, and a future free of his shadow. The courthouse was packed the day of the final hearing. Word had spread far beyond Clayton County. Reporters from Atlanta Journal-Constitution set up cameras out front, and neighbors crowded the benches inside. Folks love a scandal, but they also love justice when it's raw and undeniable. I walked Grandma Ruth up the aisle. She wore her best blue church dress and a brooch shaped like a dove. She held herself tall, even at 88. For years, she'd been quiet in that house on Willow Bend, shrinking under my father's thunder. But now, she walked steady each step, measured as if reclaiming space she'd been denied. Dad and Mom sat at the defendant's table, stiff-backed their lawyer, whispering fast. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. Mom kept her eyes on the floor. Judge Porter banged the gavel. Case of state versus David and Linda Whitaker. Charges: elder abandonment and neglect. The words rang through the room like a bell tolling. The prosecutor, James Holloway, laid out the case with surgical precision. On September 5th, the defendants drove Ruth Whitaker, age 88, to a gas station off I-75. They left her there unattended for over 6 hours. This is not an allegation, it is fact captured on video. Additionally, medical reports confirm neglect over months. This was not a mistake. This was abandonment. He pointed to the screen. The grainy video played again, the Crown Vic pulling away. Gasps rippled just as before. But this time, the audience wasn't just neighbors. It was the county. Ladies and gentlemen, Holloway continued, this is a crime against the most basic duty we owe our elders: care. Dad's lawyer tried to spin it. Mr. Whitaker was under stress. His daughter has a vendetta. She's a police officer with personal motives. The judge cut him off. Officer Whitaker's badge has nothing to do with her parents leaving an elderly woman at a gas station. Then it was Grandma's turn to testify. She leaned on the stand, her hands trembling but her voice clear. David is my son, she began, but he stopped being my caretaker the moment he left me on that bench. Eleanor, my granddaughter, she's the one who picked me up, who fed me, who gave me a bed. That is family. Not blood, not names, actions. Her words hung in the air. I saw people in the back row dab their eyes. Even the court stenographer paused for half a second before clacking on. Finally, Judge Porter delivered his ruling. He didn't rush, didn't soften. David and Linda Whitaker, this court finds you guilty of elder abandonment and neglect. You are sentenced to community service fines and mandatory counseling. More importantly, your rights to act as caregivers are permanently revoked. The guardianship remains with Eleanor Whitaker. Property rights have already been lawfully transferred. The gavel cracked down. It was official, not just in whispers, not just in family arguments, but in the eyes of the law. Under the bright light of public record, my parents were guilty. Reporters swarmed outside. One shoved a mic toward me. Officer Whitaker, do you see this as revenge? I looked straight into the camera. No, this isn't revenge. This is justice for my grandmother, for every elder who deserves dignity. Abandonment isn't just cruel, it's criminal. And today, the court made that clear. Grandma squeezed my arm, whispering, well said. Across the parking lot, Dad glared at me, red-faced, his fists clenched. But he couldn't shout the way he used to. Not with cameras rolling, not with the gavel's echo still hanging in the air. For the first time in my life, his voice was drowned out by truth. That evening, back home, neighbors came by with casseroles, pies, even a bouquet of flowers. They hugged Grandma, shook my hand, and told us we'd done the right thing. One older man, Mr. Johnson from down the block, said, Ellie, you gave us all courage. Folks talk about family like it's something you inherit. You showed it's something you protect. Grandma smiled at that, her eyes glistening. That's all I ever wanted. When the house emptied out, we sat on the porch swing. The cicadas sang, the air smelled of honeysuckle, and for the first time in years, peace wrapped around us like a quilt. Ellie, Grandma said softly, "I used to pray you'd come home. I didn't know it'd be like this, but I thank God it is." I leaned my head against hers. "You're home now, Grandma. That's what matters." The climax wasn't just the gavel or the cameras or the whispers silenced. It was this: the quiet of the porch, the steady beat of cicadas, the knowledge that she was safe, and the truth that we had spoken loud enough for the whole county to hear. Justice wasn't always fireworks. Sometimes it was just a tired old woman finally sleeping without fear, and her granddaughter knowing she kept her promise. The weeks after the trial felt quieter than I'd expected. No more reporters, no more courthouse benches, no more files stacked on my kitchen table. Just mornings with the smell of coffee drifting through my little brick house, and Grandma Ruth humming softly as she watered the potted violets by the window. One night, she and I drove out past Willow Bend. The old house had already changed hands. The new owners had painted the shutters green and set a swing in the yard. The oak tree still stood wide and strong roots deep in the soil Grandma once tilled. She stared at it for a long while. "It's funny," she murmured. "For years that house was a prison, and now, without it, I feel free." I glanced at her, the glow of the dashboard light soft on her face. "Because justice set you free, Grandma. Not bricks or deeds, justice." She nodded, eyes closing briefly. "And because you didn't turn away, even after what he did to you." I didn't answer right away. My mind flicked back to that night patrol lights flashing against the Speedy Mart's cracked glass, the shock of finding her there. I realized then what tied the last 15 years together: survival wasn't the end goal. Dignity was. A month later, the church invited Grandma to speak at the Wednesday supper. She stood at the front with her cane, her voice thin but firm. I was left alone when I should have been cared for. She told the room, eyes steady on faces that had known her for decades. But my granddaughter reminded me that silence is not love. Protection is. Standing up is. And I thank her for it. People clapped, some cried. I sat in the back, heart heavy and light all at once. That night on the porch, Grandma turned to me. "Ellie, your father lost his pride. Your mother lost her silence. But you," she reached for my hand, "you gained something more. You gained the truth of who you are." I squeezed her hand. "And who's that?" She smiled faintly. "The one who remembers that justice is never too late." I look back now and see it clear: the gas station wasn't just where I found her. It was where I found myself. 15 years after being thrown out, I'd come full circle, not to reclaim what was stolen, but to prove what couldn't be taken. For anyone listening tonight, especially those who've known silence in their families, I'll leave you with this. Don't mistake blood for love. Don't mistake a roof for a home. And don't mistake silence for peace. Sometimes you have to speak. Sometimes you have to stand. And sometimes justice is the only way to love someone back. So share this story if it moved you. Reflect on it, pass it on, and remember, dignity is worth defending no matter how long it takes.